The Florida Legislature considers changing the rules for working teenagers. You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. A pair of bills are working their way through the Florida State House that could change the rules for working teenagers. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 set federal baselines for what constitutes acceptable working conditions for youth under 18, laws that prevent kids from operating dangerous machinery like meat processors or working on rooftops. Many of the regulations deal with scheduling and school times. Kids under 16 are not allowed to work certain hours during the school year. States can bolster these protections, as Florida has over the years. For example, state law mandates that minors under 17 cannot work more than 4 hours in a row without a break. Now, the Florida Legislature is looking to follow the lead of other states like Arkansas, New Hampshire, and New Jersey, which in recent years have loosened state laws that regulate the employment of minors. A deeper dive into the proposed changes to child labor laws. That's ahead on The Wrap, the big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these news headlines. A plan that would reduce Florida's sales tax permanently is moving through the state legislature. As WUSF's Douglas Soul reports, a bipartisan committee approved the measure on Wednesday, but Governor Ron DeSantis opposes it.
The bill would decrease the state sales tax on many goods and services from 6% to 5.25%. It would also slice down other sales taxes, reducing rates on commercial rent, new mobile homes, and more. Republican Representative Wyman Duggan presented the bill.
We are clearly setting a course and a vision that is going to provide immediate, meaningful relief to every single Floridian that makes a purchase.
Cutting sales taxes would cost the state about $5 billion in revenue each year. Governor Ron DeSantis is against it. He's pushing for a one-time property tax break instead. Senate President Ben Albritton says he's worried cuts, especially permanent ones, could make it harder to pay for critical services down the line. But he says he's open-minded about both ideas. I'm Douglas Soul in Tallahassee.
Governor Ron DeSantis has concerns about a bill that would decouple gambling from live thoroughbred racing at Gulfstream Park in Broward County and Tampa Bay Downs. But he says he's waiting to see how they unfold. Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns has more.
GOP-sponsored bills that would decouple live racing from parimutuel betting and other gambling at the two main thoroughbred tracks in Florida are nearing the homestretch in the House and out of the gate in the Senate. Proponents say decoupling is needed to preserve racing in Florida. Opponents say it could end live racing and devastate their industry. Governor DeSantis spoke at a press conference in Ocala, the heart of thoroughbred country.
If you put Florida first, then you're looking to make sure that Floridians can be successful. And the horse breeding is part of our state's culture. It's part of the culture here. I'm concerned with some of the things I hear about these proposals, about what that would mean for the viability of that going forward.
This week, the Senate bill was amended to delay the decoupling for 7 years. Joe Burns, Central Florida Public Media.
In a special election Tuesday, former Brevard County legislator Randy Fine won the 6th congressional district seat that Mike Waltz vacated to become President Donald Trump's national security advisor. The GOP candidate won with 57% of the vote over 6 counties. Randy Fine is a former state representative and briefly a senator, a self-described conservative firebrand who touted President Trump's endorsement. He defeated Democrat Josh Wheel, a public school teacher from Orlando, by 14 percentage points. Waltz had won the district by 33 points and Trump by about 30 points in November. These stories and more on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. A Central Florida group aims to help share the magic of cinema with multilingual families thanks to an app.
So what Theater's Ears really does is it gives people the ability to have shared experiences with others that they can then talk about and relate to and create memories with.
How that app is helping Spanish speakers at the theater. That's this week on Spotlight. Get it wherever you get this podcast. A pair of bills working their way through the Florida State House would change the rules for working teenagers. If passed, the bills would allow children as young as 14 to work overnight shifts, even on school nights. Current Florida law caps nighttime work for minors at 11 p.m. on school nights. The new law would also allow employers to schedule kids for more than 30 hours a week, scheduled during school hours, and eliminate mandatory breaks. For Central Florida Public Media's Engage, Joe Mario Pedersen spoke with Holly Bullard, the Chief Strategy and Development Officer with the Florida Policy Institute. She begins the conversation by speaking anecdotally about her experience working in her teen years.
I worked at a cafe and a mom and pop shop when I was 15 and 16 and had a lot of support there, but there were limitations, right? That mom and pop small shop could not schedule me for over 30 hours during school. I was able to keep that to a minimum so that I could invest that time in education and commit myself to education. And that's what you hear over and over and over again from teens today is that they see the current laws as just what needs to be, right? And that they are just fine being able to get a part-time job and balance school under current law. And especially when it comes to their own parents' businesses, if their parents have a farm, there are these carve outs for younger children. But I mean, let's be clear here that going back to previous generations, early 20th century child labor is very dangerous, right? In terms of just being able to not have the eyes on these kids, in terms of some of the children not being able to have adults take care of them or be protected against exploitation.
Holly, is it overly speculative to suggest these protections are being removed because of the worker gap that's being created by Trump's deportations of undocumented residents?
I don't think it's speculative per se. I think that there are politicians in our own state who have made this connection. The governor also pointed to the need to look for teens to fill a gap. But honestly, I think it had to do with more of the labor shortage post COVID. If we all remember we were in a kind of a tight labor market that added a lot of power to labor, to working people in 2021, 22. So you saw wages tick up and then this push for finding more labor and some more low wage labor.
We've been talking about a bill, but of course, we're really talking about two bills. Senate Bill 918 and House Bill, the companion bill 1225, of course. And I wanted to ask you, just as far as those two bills go, if they were to pass, who benefits directly from that?
Honestly, some employers, but I don't think all employers would fall into this bucket. It would be unscrupulous employers who would want to overschedule young people. That's all that these bills allow at the moment is either to overschedule kids beyond 30 hours a week during a school week. In the Senate at the moment, it's there's no curfew, so overnight. And both bills take away currently the mandatory break that a minor has to have every 8 hours. Last year we moved it went from 4 to 8 hours. So we saved it for a kid for 8 hours that he gets a break. And both of these bills take away his lunch break. I don't know who that benefits other than an unscrupulous employer. Now I hope the scrupulous employers and all well-meaning people who want to preserve the balance and who say, I'm not going to leverage this. What do I care, Holly? Well, it absolutely impacts our entire community when some of our most vulnerable kids are essentially preyed upon by unscrupulous employers who can overschedule them and have just overwhelming amount of exploitation in the community. There's no purpose for this bill outside of that. And the only person who would benefit from an amendment that the sponsor in the House today said that it was came at the request of Senator Randy Fine that he asked for it to be amended to reduce the age to 13 for work. Okay. The only people who would actually fit that bill, because the federal government says you can't work under 14 outside of certain occupations. The vast majority of that is agriculture. So what are we talking about is 13-year-old kids to fill the gap for a labor shortage for farm and agriculture work in Florida.
We reached out to Senator Jay Collins, who is the sponsor of SB 918, and Senator Collins attests that this is a matter of parental choice, not to be regulated by the government. Holly, what's your response to that?
Well, current law has a waiver process wherein parents can submit waivers. If your kid is in public school, the waiver goes to the superintendent. And if they're not, it actually goes to the Department of Business Practices and Revenue, DPPR, who oversees child labor infractions in Florida. So Right now, under current law, we have the option for parents to make a choice to be proactive. If they say, hey, my kid is all-star student or they have an apprenticeship, they can file a waiver right now. What this bill does, both bills, is that it takes the power away from the parents and gives it to the employer. The employer then say, you know what? Thank you, legislature. I now can actually schedule this kid during school day, overnight for the Senate one, over 30 hours a week during school session. And I don't have to be bothered with the school, the scheduling. And also his lunch break is taken away. So you don't need a lunch break either.
You mentioned a number of dangers that could come along with this bill. And, just to, I guess, really hammer that home, where do you see potential dangers or opportunities for exploitation to youths under these bills?
If you take away pretty much any restrictions for 16 and 17-year-olds, then an employer, if your mom and pop shop, a gas station or something, I no longer have to care about sending this 16-year-old home at a certain time so that he can study the night before. I no longer have to care that I'm going to schedule him to come in the middle of school. And that if he doesn't want to do that, then tough luck. You're going to be fired, right? Like the government is no longer telling me that I have to take into account his schooling for scheduling purposes. And there are children in Florida, there are teens in Florida, right? Over 60,000 kids who are 16 or 17 are actually juggling now work in school. There's over 60,000. And many of them don't have the wherewithal to say no and to just quit. Okay. And they're impressionable. They are young people. We need to protect them and help them stand up for themselves and for their futures and for their education.
I have one last question for you, Holly, and that we saw a rollback on restrictions last year, right? And I'm wondering if these bills, these proposed bills that we're seeing, if it's part of some sort of like tiptoe strategy of a way of, I guess, to move the chains closer to like some sort of goalpost down the road.
I hope not, but stepping back and observing, it seems like that, coming back again and again. There are well-funded proponents of expanding child labor and or, rolling back these protections. An organization called Foundation for Government Accountability. There was actually really good reporting last year and records requests that just showed FGA actually wrote the bill. Until we can get to that point where our children and the tipping point of pulling between education and work at a younger age, understanding that let kids be kids can't just be a mantra for when it's convenient, but that when it's about them working instead of going to school, even if they'd like to go to school, then that's no longer acceptable. So it does seem like a trend. This is something that is not just Florida. This is across the United States, and that we've seen a lot of that, too before, right? As things happen in Florida, it also starts to domino in other states as well, or federally. And so this isn't just about Florida. This is about, how do we treat our children and preserve their future and allow them to be kids and to have that development time for their brain and to devote the appropriate amount of time to their studies and to growing into the adult that they will become.
That was Central Florida Public Media's Joe Mario Pedersen speaking with Holly Bullard, the Chief Strategy and Development Officer with the Florida Policy Institute. We invited both sponsors of the bill to this discussion, Senator Jay Collins and Representative Monique Miller. We never heard from Miller's staff, but we did get a written statement from Senator Collins' aide that said, quote, "This is about trusting parents, not government, with decisions about their own kids. This bill gives families the freedom to decide when their teenagers can work while still keeping basic guardrails in place. It lines Florida up with federal law and removes red tape that held back motivated young people who want to earn a paycheck and build real-world experience. There are no mandates in this bill, just more options for families. It puts the choice back where it belongs, with the family and not the government." End quote. We also invited representatives from the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, the primary trade association supporting this legislation. We received no response. That's it for The Wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director Latoya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.